a millionaire installed hidden cameras to watch the nanny. But what he saw his own son do left him stunned. A secret powerful enough to turn everything upside down. The Mitchell mansion seemed to breathe silence. Tall, surrounded by walls and dark trees, it held more memories than laughter. Ever since the death of Jennifer, his wife Andrew lived on autopilot, sunken eyes, unshaven beard, and a routine marked by bitterness. Ethan, his 2-year-old son, grew up quiet, surrounded by expensive toys he didn't know how to use. To the media, Andrew was a reserved billionaire, an investment genius, widowed at a young age. Inside the house, he was a broken man, and worse, distrustful. After 5 dismissals in less than a year, he no longer saw housekeepers as help, but as threats. The last one had been caught snooping through the drawers in his office. Before her, a nanny who exchanged messages mocking the boy. Trust, for him, was an extinct commodity. On that cloudy Tuesday morning, Olivia arrived. Young, simply dressed, and with calm eyes, she waited in the living room, holding a worn-out bag on her lap. Andrew walked in without greeting her. "Name?" he fired, sitting in front of her with a tablet in hand. "Olivia Bennett." "Experience?" "I worked in family homes for the past 6 years. I took care of newborn twins for 2 years, and before that, a senior woman with Alzheimer's." Andrew watched her more than he listened. The way she spoke softly, how she didn't look away, how she didn't ask questions. That bothered him. "And why do you want this job?" He narrowed his eyes. Olivia hesitated for a second, but she didn't lie. "Because I need it, but also because I like caring for people, being part of something." That last sentence sounded rehearsed to Andrew. He noted it on the tablet, thanked her, and left the room. 2 hours later, without warning, she received a message with the address to start the next day. What Olivia didn't know was that, before the interview even ended, Andrew had already set a plan in motion. He had hidden cameras installed in the main rooms, living room, kitchen, hallways, and even in his son's bedroom. Just as a precaution, he told himself. Olivia arrived early, punctual. The house was huge, cold, and seemed to scream for care. Andrew presented her with an almost military instruction manual. Schedules, routines, no personal conversations, and absolutely no entry into the office. She simply nodded. In the first days, she followed everything rigorously. She woke up before everyone else, prepared breakfast, tidied Ethan's room, and then spent hours with him in the garden. Andrew watched everything through the footage. Olivia didn't just make the boy eat, she made him smile. She told stories, invented games, sang songs he had never heard before. Ethan began babbling new words, getting interested in drawings, sleeping without crying. Andrew felt a corrosive mix of relief and suspicion. How could she do that? Why did Ethan seem more alive with her? That night, in his dark office, he re-watched all the day's recordings. In one of them, Olivia helped Ethan build colorful blocks. Later, with him already asleep in her arms, she walked to the living room bookshelf. There, she stopped in front of an old photo, Andrew with his parents, taken when he was still a teenager. Olivia stared at the portrait for long seconds. She caressed the frame with her fingers and, almost in a whisper, murmured, "You've always been a good man, Mr. Charles." Andrew paused the video, rewound it, played it again. Olivia looking at the photo, caressing the frame, the whisper, "You've always been a good man, Mr. Charles." The name. How did she know his father's name? Andrew froze in his chair. His heart raced. It made no sense. His father, Charles Mitchell, had died more than 15 years ago. He was remembered by few, almost always within the family itself. That name never appeared in reports or public photos. Olivia couldn't know, unless she had some connection to the past. One he didn't know about. Over the next few days, Andrew watched the recordings with increasing obsession. He rewatched everything: conversations, gestures, words spoken outside Ethan's reach. He searched for slip-ups, lies, signs of ulterior motives. But all he found was a woman who treated his son with more love than he himself was able to give. That realization ate at him from the inside. Ethan now ran through the house, played hide-and-seek with Olivia, listened to stories about dragons, laughed at silly things, ate vegetables without complaining. Andrew sometimes found himself, from a distance, watching everything from the half-open door. It was like watching a movie he didn't belong to. One night, as he approached Ethan's bedroom door, he heard a lullaby. Olivia's voice was gentle. She sang an old song Andrew vaguely remembered from childhood. His mother used to sing the same one. He stepped back, returned to the office, turned on the footage, went back to the scene with the photo. "You've always been a good man, Mr. Charles." There was something there. Something he needed to uncover. But for now, he just watched, suspected, and feared more than anything that he was growing attached to the one person he most wanted to keep at a distance. Andrew hadn't slept in 3 nights. The recording of Olivia speaking to the photo of his father played in his mind like a haunted melody. "You've always been a good man, Mr. Charles." The phrase echoed, unbearable, inexplicable. Olivia was far too young to have ever met his father personally. Charles Mitchell had died while Andrew was still in college. And yet, there was something in her tone. It wasn't a sentence spoken by chance. It wasn't curiosity. It was affection. Old respect. Andrew started watching her with twice the attention. Every night he stared at the cameras as if hunting for a hidden truth. Every gesture she made was analyzed. Every word weighed. The image of Olivia smiling at Ethan, teaching him how to put on his shirt or praising a crooked drawing as if it were a masterpiece, made him uncomfortable. Ethan seemed happy, and Andrew didn't know how to deal with that. The next morning, Olivia cleaned the house following her usual routine. Andrew, from his office, watched everything through the screens. He saw when she walked into the reading room and stopped in front of the bookshelf. Her eyes scanned the books and then dropped down to a dark wooden box, forgotten in a corner of the shelf. Andrew froze. That box had belonged to his father. It held old letters, running medals, birthday cards, things Andrew didn't even touch anymore. Olivia knelt in front of the box. She brushed her fingers across the dusty lid, slowly opened it. Inside, she pulled out an aged letter, read the first lines, and smiled. Andrew jumped to his feet, knocking over the chair. "What does she think she's doing?" He slammed the office door and walked toward the hallway, but stopped before being seen. He took a deep breath. His first impulse was to fire her on the spot, but something made him hesitate. That same afternoon, he began drafting a justification. "Team restructuring," the note said. He had even written the termination letter when Ethan's baby monitor gave a warning. A sharp noise, then a muffled sound. It was Ethan. Andrew ran up the stairs. The boy's bedroom light was on, and Olivia was kneeling beside the bed, holding Ethan upright in her arms, tilting his little body forward. "Breathe, Ethan. That's it. Come on, sweetie. Let's let that air out." Andrew froze at the doorway. The boy gasped, pulling in air with difficulty. It was an episode, the kind Andrew feared since the diagnosis of childhood asthma. But he had no idea what to do. Olivia pulled an inhaler from her bag and positioned it with precision. 2 puffs. Inhale. 1 more. Little by little, Ethan's chest calmed. His eyes were teary, but the crying gave way to exhaustion. Olivia held him close and hummed softly until he fell asleep. Andrew didn't utter a single word. That night, the termination letter remained on the desk, but unsigned. Hours later, while Ethan slept in the next room, Andrew went downstairs, restless. The scene with the box wouldn't leave his mind. The tenderness Olivia showed with the boy. The control she had during the crisis. The smile while reading a letter from the past. Who was she, after all? He walked to the entry hall. Olivia's bag sat on a chair. He hesitated. For a second, his conscience weighed on him, but paranoia spoke louder. He unzipped it carefully. He was looking for the inhaler, but found something much more. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a pale scarf, was an old medallion, round, made of tarnished silver. Andrew opened it. Inside, 2 photos. The first, his father, Charles Mitchell, still young, wearing an Air Force uniform with that same restrained smile. The second, a woman Andrew didn't recognize at first, but something in her eyes felt familiar. She smiled, with the gentle, weary expression of someone who had lived a lot. Andrew felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't normal. It wasn't coincidence. Olivia knew more about his family than she claimed, and now he had proof. The question hammered in his mind. Why would a housekeeper have a locket with his father's photo inside it? Olivia was hiding something, and Andrew was more determined than ever to find out what. Andrew stared at the open locket in his hand. His father's image, so vivid inside it, seemed to mock his ignorance. The other woman in the photo, unknown until now, suddenly had a name, or at least he suspected she did, and he would confirm it. He waited until Olivia finished putting Ethan to bed. She came down the stairs with gentle steps, as she always did. But Andrew was waiting in the living room, sitting in silence, the locket closed on the table. "Sit," he said, his voice dry. She obeyed, confused. Andrew pushed the locket to the center of the table. "It was in your bag." Olivia didn't answer immediately. Her eyes faltered for a second, and he caught it. "Answer. Who is this woman?" She took a deep breath. "My mother." Andrew straightened in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "And the man?" "Your father." Silence. A thick silence filling the room like smoke. Andrew clenched his fists. Every word she spoke stabbed him deeper. "You lied from the beginning," he growled. "You got close to my son, my house, knowing exactly who we were." "I never lied," she said firmly. "You never asked. You knew who I was. You knew who my father was. And I never meant you any harm." Andrew stood abruptly. He walked to the door and opened it with force. "Get out of my house!" Olivia stood still for a moment, as if waiting for him to reconsider. But Andrew didn't. No more words, no permission for explanations. She went upstairs quietly, gathered her things. She passed by Ethan's room without entering. She cried softly in the car, not knowing whether because of the injustice or the pain of leaving the boy she barely had time to love. The next morning, the house was silent. Ethan refused breakfast. He didn't want to play, eat, or talk. He dragged his blanket around the living room as if searching for someone. Andrew tried to distract him, put on cartoons, brought toys. Nothing. At lunch, he rejected the food. At dinner, he cried himself to sleep. Andrew began to feel the true weight of her absence. Olivia wasn't just a housekeeper. She was presence. She was affection. She was the bridge he didn't know he needed. But pride still held him upright, cold, motionless. That night, unable to sleep, Andrew decided to search through his father's old wardrobe, something he had avoided for years. He found folders, letters, awards, property documents, newspaper clippings. At the bottom of one drawer, an old notebook, worn leather cover, yellowed pages. Charles's diaries. Andrew flipped through with little interest until one name made him stop. Margaret. There it was, written in strong handwriting. "Today, Margaret saved me. I will never forget. Her courage is greater than many men I've met in my life." Further on, Olivia was born. Such a strong girl. Margaret raised her alone with dignity. People like her make the world better. Andrew sat down, stunned. He read everything. dozens of pages describing Margaret as a loyal woman, hard-working, someone completely trustworthy, and Olivia mentioned as a lively child. Olivia wasn't a stranger. She was part of the Mitchell family history. Hours later, still in shock, Andrew returned to the office. He opened the video folders from previous weeks. He searched obsessively for something he had overlooked. He found it. Ethan was on the floor, playing with blocks. Olivia sat beside him, knees bent, gently taking his little hand. She kissed the boy's fingers and said, almost in a whisper, "Your mother asked me to. I promised." Andrew paused the video, rewound it, played it again. "Your mother asked me to. I promised." The words hit deep, strong, impossible to ignore. Promised? How? Jennifer knew Olivia? Andrew leaned back in the chair. For the first time in a long time, he felt fear. Not fear of betrayal, not fear of manipulation, but fear of having made an irreparable mistake. Olivia had promised the woman he loved to take care of their son, and he had thrown her out without listening. Dawn found Andrew still awake, his eyes red and his hands dusty from the old files. The image of Olivia whispering that promise to Ethan echoed inside him like a silent drum. Guilt was beginning to weigh heavier than distrust. He decided he needed to know everything. Now, completely. He returned to the office and accessed the old family records. He dug through contracts, employee lists, payment sheets from the 90s. It took time, but he found it. Margaret Bennett, housekeeper, hired in 1995. Worked for 8 years in Andrew's parents' home. Just below, handwritten notes from his mother. Trustworthy, honest, loving. She will be with us for a long time. Andrew exhaled deeply. The missing piece of the puzzle was right there, but it still wasn't enough. He went to the memory chest in Jennifer's bedroom, something he had never had the courage to open since her death. Among the folded clothes, still smelling faintly of her perfume, Andrew found a light wooden box. Inside it, an envelope with his name sealed in her handwriting. Andrew, for when I'm no longer here. His hands trembled as he opened it. Her handwriting was steady but delicate. The letter was dated 2 weeks before she gave birth. My love, if I don't return, I want you to know that I am at peace, that everything I lived with you was worth every second, and that Ethan will be our best part. I am not alone. I have a friend nearby, someone who appeared out of nowhere but seems to have been sent by an angel. Her name is Olivia, and if you ever come across her, trust her. She gave me strength on my worst days. She listened when all I wanted to do was cry. If I'm not here, please, hear what she has to say. She knows my pain, and she made a promise I know she will keep. With all my love, Jennifer. Andrew pressed the paper against his chest. It was her. From the beginning. The same Olivia. 2 hours later, Andrew stood in front of a modest apartment building in a quiet, distant neighborhood. It had taken effort to find the address, but there it was. The name on the mailbox confirmed it. Olivia Bennett. He rang the intercom. Her voice came through, hesitant, surprised. Hello? Olivia, it's Andrew. Silence, long, almost hostile. I just want to talk, he said softly. Please. The gate unlocked. She received him with swollen eyes and hair tied up hastily. She didn't smile. She didn't offer coffee. She simply pointed to a chair and sat across from him. You can speak. Andrew took the locket from his pocket and placed it on the table. I already know who Margaret was. I found Jennifer's letter too. And I'm here because I need to understand the rest. All of it. Olivia held the locket for a moment. She closed her eyes as if accessing a memory too old, too heavy. When she spoke, her voice was low but steady. My mother worked in your family's house for years. I was little then. I remember the mansion, the gardens, the furniture covered in white cloths. I remember your father. He was different, kind. He respected my mother, treated us with dignity." She paused. Her eyes were already shimmering. "One day there was a fire, a short circuit upstairs. My mother got trapped with another employee. It was your father who ran in without hesitation and pulled them both out. He almost died that day." Andrew had no words. "After that, my mother saw him as a hero. But life cycles the way it does, and she got sick early. When I became an adult, I promised her two things: that I would repay what the Mitchell family did for us, and that I would use everything she taught me to care for whoever needed it." Olivia took a deep breath. The hardest part was coming. Years later, I met Jennifer again. We met by accident, a doctor's appointment. She was pregnant, scared, alone. We talked. I didn't tell her about my mother at first, but she embraced me, told me everything about the baby, about her fears. I became support for her during those last months. Andrew listened in silence, his face growing paler with each word. One day, before the delivery, she pulled me aside. She was crying a lot, and she said, "If I don't come back, take care of him. Promise me." Olivia looked directly at Andrew, her voice breaking. "And I promised." Silence. Only the distant sound of cars on the street filled the air between them. I didn't come after an inheritance or recognition. I only wanted to keep my word, to do what my mother would have done, and what Jennifer asked me to do. Andrew ran a hand over his face, as if trying to scrape the shame off along with the cold sweat. Everything he thought he knew about Olivia shattered, every suspicion, every accusation. She never wanted anything except to take care of his son. She was the only one who was truly there, out of love. Andrew had never felt so small in the face of a truth. Back in the silent mansion, the walls that once protected his distrust now echoed nothing but loneliness. Ethan wandered through the house, dragging his teddy bear, eyes distant. He no longer asked for food, didn't want to play. He only murmured softly every now and then, "Olivia? Where's Olivia?" The name, cut by a child's voice, hurt more deeply than any accusation. Andrew carried him to his room and set him on the bed. He stayed there for several long minutes, watching his son fall asleep. His tiny fingers clung to the bed sheet, as if waiting for her to return. The next day, Andrew did something he had avoided for a long time. He drove to the cemetery where Jennifer was buried. He carried flowers in his hands and guilt on his shoulders. Before the simple white marble headstone, he remained silent. Then, he knelt. "I messed up, Jennifer. I pushed away the only person who was still here for you. For us. I was stupid, blind, and Ethan. He feels more than I ever imagined." His voice trembled. "She took care of him in ways I didn't know how, and I threw her out." He ran his hand over her engraved name, as if asking for permission. "Help me fix this. Please." Hours later, Andrew parked once again in front of Olivia's modest building. He brought no security, no demands. He brought his heart in his hands. She opened the door with wary eyes. "Again, Andrew?" He nodded without arrogance. "Let me try one more time." Olivia crossed her arms but didn't close the door. That was something. "I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and there's no excuse. I accused you, judged you, humiliated you, when all you were doing was keeping a promise." Olivia looked at him steadily. Inside, her heart battled between wounded pride and compassion. "I came to ask for forgiveness, for what I did and for what I failed to see." At that moment, a sound in the hallway made them both look back. Ethan, running. Andrew hadn't even noticed the driver bringing him along. The boy darted past him like lightning and threw himself into Olivia's arms. "Olivia!" Olivia knelt, hugging Ethan tightly. She cried. For the first time since being expelled from that house, she cried without fear. Ethan clung to her as if terrified of losing her again. Andrew looked away, swallowing the tears that insisted on coming. The ice broke right there, not with words, but with a child's embrace that said everything. Later, sitting on Olivia's couch, she took a deep breath. "If I go back," she began, "I'm not coming back as a housekeeper." Andrew nodded immediately. "Of course. You're not one. And I won't accept being watched anymore, or tested, or treated like some background piece in your lives." He didn't hesitate. "You are part of all this, Olivia. You always were. I was the one who didn't see it." She studied his face for a few seconds. There was sincerity and exhaustion, but above all, there was truth. "Okay then," she said softly. Andrew extended his hand. Olivia hesitated. Then she took it. A silent pact was sealed, not of employment but of trust. That night, back at the mansion, Ethan ran through the living room and laughed out loud for the first time in days. Olivia walked behind him with a discreet smile, as someone who knows exactly where she belongs. Not in front, not behind, but beside them. Andrew stood a few steps back, watching the two of them. He felt different. Not light, not yet, but better. As if he had finally opened a window after years inside a dark room. When Olivia turned to him, waiting for instructions about Ethan's routine, Andrew simply said, "There's no need to ask me anything. Do whatever you think is best. I trust you." She nodded. At the end of the day, with Ethan already asleep, the two of them found themselves on the balcony. The sky was clear, the breeze cold. Andrew stayed silent for a moment. Then he turned to her. "You're part of our family. You always were." Olivia didn't answer, but her eyes, filled with tears, said everything. 6 months later, the Mitchell mansion was no longer the same. The heavy silence had been replaced by soft music, footsteps running through the hallways, the smell of cake in the oven, toys scattered across the living room floor. Where there had once been distrust and pain, there was now life. Olivia was the heart of the house. She woke up early, organized Ethan's schedule, coordinated the staff with gentle firmness, and between one task and another, found time to play, tell stories, or hum old songs that the boy now knew by heart. Ethan grew, not in height, but in brightness. He was no longer the quiet, distant little boy. Now he ran through the corridors, asked questions, invented adventures, and most importantly, he smiled easily. Andrew watched everything with new eyes. He still wasn't a light-hearted man. The scars from losing Jennifer were still there, as was the weight of the past. But something had changed. He now allowed lightness. He made an effort to be present. He sat on the floor to play, took Ethan to the park, sometimes even set work aside just to watch him sleep. Olivia was no longer the new employee. She was part of the structure, part of the routine, part of the family. On the morning of Ethan's 3rd birthday, the house was filled with celebration. There were no extravagant decorations, no important guests, no photographers. It was intimate, simple, real. Ethan ran back and forth with a paper hat on his head, shouting, "It's my day!" Olivia laughed, setting up the table with crooked brigadeiros and balloons taped up with adhesive. Andrew, sleeves rolled up, tried, not very successfully, to inflate balloons with an air pump. When the birthday song was over and the cake was already torn apart by tiny hands, Andrew called Olivia into the next room. He was nervous. Words rehearsed, palms sweating inside his pocket. She walked in, still with a bit of frosting on her blouse. "Everything okay?" Andrew nodded. He extended his closed hand. When he opened it, There was the locket, but no longer aged. Now cleaned, restored, and changed. Olivia took it in her hands, surprised. When she opened it, she saw three faces. On one side, Charles, Andrew's father. On the other, Margaret, her mother. And in the center, a small photo of Jennifer, smiling, eyes full of life. Olivia covered her mouth with her hand. "I asked them to put it together the way it should have been from the beginning," Andrew said quietly. "Three people you never forgot, and who will now go with you always." She pressed the locket to her chest, her eyes already welling up. "Promises like yours cross time," he continued, "and I wanted to thank you for taking care of what I couldn't." Olivia didn't answer right away. She just looked at him with tenderness. And in that look, there was forgiveness, there was peace, there was love. "You didn't fail, Andrew. You just couldn't do it alone." He smiled, small, real, like someone who finally understood. On the balcony, at the end of the day, Ethan slept in Olivia's arms, his face smudged with chocolate and his hair messy. Andrew sat beside them in silence, with a blanket in his hands. He covered his son and looked around. The mansion, which for so long had been a prison, was now a home. "And you? What did you think of this story? If it touched your heart the way it touched Andrew's and Olivia's, tell me something real quick before you head off to rest. At what moment did you see yourself in their journey? And where are you watching from? Your comment helps this message reach more people. And if you want to support stories like this one, leave a like and hit subscribe. It makes all the difference.